The battlefield went silent for just a second. Smoke rose from burning armor. Bullets cracked through the air, and German soldiers froze in disbelief. A Sherman tank stood abandoned in the middle of chaos. Its hatch was open. The Americans had fled, or so the Germans thought. What they didn't know was that the man who stepped out of that tank was not retreating. He was about to turn himself into a one-man army. By the time the sun set, over 300 German soldiers would lie dead, and the Germans would never understand how a tanker, trained to fight from steel, became something far deadlier without it. This is the unbelievable true-style WW2 story of courage, fury, and impossible survival. By 1944, World War II had become a war of machines. Tanks ruled the battlefield. Whoever controlled armor controlled the ground. The American M4 Sherman was everywhere, fast, reliable, and easy to repair. But it had a weakness. Against German Panthers and Tigers, Shermans often burned before crews could escape. Every tanker knew this. Every man who climbed inside a Sherman accepted one truth. You might not come back out. He wasn't famous. No medals, no heroic nickname. Just an American tanker in his early 20s. Dirt on his face. Fear buried deep and anger growing every day. He had seen friends die screaming inside burning tanks. He had seen villages destroyed and civilians shot without mercy. This war had taken something from him, and he was done running. The Sherman rolled forward with an infantry column through a shattered European town. German resistance was expected to be light. That was a lie. Hidden anti-tank guns opened fire. Panzerfaust slammed into American armor. The street exploded into fire and steel. One Sherman burned. Another was disabled. And then his tank was hit. The impact threw him against the steel interior. The engine screamed. Smoke filled the turret. Ammo racks rattled, one spark away from explosion. The tank commander shouted orders. The driver panicked. Then came the words every tanker feared. Bail out! The hatch burst open. Crew members jumped out, running for cover. German machine guns opened fire immediately. 2 Americans fell before reaching safety. He jumped last, but instead of running, he stopped. German soldiers saw the abandoned Sherman and assumed the fight was over. To them, tankers without tanks were cowards or corpses waiting to happen. They were wrong, because this tanker wasn't retreating, he was hunting. He grabbed a Thompson submachine gun from the ground, then grenades, then extra ammo from fallen infantry. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He moved toward the enemy, alone. German soldiers advanced carelessly, thinking the Americans had broken. That's when gunfire erupted from the rubble. Short bursts, precise, deadly. The first German squad never knew what hit them. The tanker changed positions constantly. Fire, move, reload, repeat. The Germans believed they were facing a full American platoon. They didn't realize it was one man. He used destroyed buildings as cover, craters as fighting positions, burning wrecks as concealment. Every movement was calculated. Every bullet counted. Then he did something insane. He ran back to his disabled Sherman. German soldiers stared in disbelief as he climbed back onto the tank, alone. He mounted the .50 caliber machine gun on top of the Sherman. No armor, no protection, just rage and steel. The .50 cal roared. German soldiers fell in rows. Sandbags shredded. Walls collapsed. The sound echoed across the battlefield like thunder. German officers screamed orders. Units broke formation. Some tried to flank. Others froze. They couldn't understand how a single tanker had become this deadly. When ammo ran low, he jumped down, pulled his pistol, and kept fighting. Grenades exploded among advancing troops. Screams filled the smoke. Wave after wave came at him, and wave after wave fell. He was wounded, bleeding, exhausted, but still standing. By the time American reinforcements arrived, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Bodies everywhere, weapons abandoned. German resistance completely shattered. Later estimates suggested nearly 300 German soldiers had been killed or incapacitated by one man. The tanker collapsed when the fight ended. Doctors rushed to him. Officers stared in silence. They had never seen anything like this. His story spread quietly through the ranks, not as propaganda, but as truth. A reminder that sometimes one man can change the course of battle. He never called himself a hero. He said he just did what had to be done. War didn't make him brave. It revealed what was already there. Blood soaked through his uniform. Shrapnel had torn into his shoulder, and a bullet had grazed his leg. Every step burned, but pain no longer mattered. He had crossed a line inside himself, the place where fear dies. German commanders finally understood something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a broken American defense. This was a trap made of rage. They ordered a counterattack. Mortars fell. Machine guns opened up. An entire company moved forward to erase one man. Through smoke and fire, German soldiers saw him. A single silhouette standing beside a dead Sherman tank. Not retreating. Not hiding. Waiting. That sight alone broke morale in some units. He crawled beneath the Sherman's burned hull. Used it like a steel bunker. German bullets sparked off the armor above him. He fired from underneath, unseen, unstoppable. Men fell without ever knowing where death came from. A grenade landed near him. No time to throw it back. The blast lifted him off the ground and slammed him into rubble. Ears ringing. Vision blurred. For a moment, everything went black. When his eyes opened, the fight was still raging. German boots moved closer. He forced himself up. Broken, bleeding, furious, and still alive. He grabbed a fallen German MP-40, then another grenade. Now he fought with enemy weapons, turning their own fire against them. Psychological warfare at its purest. Paragraph 28. Germans believe it's a trap. Radio reports flew across German lines. Multiple American positions. Heavy resistance. Armor support suspected. None of it was true. They were chasing a ghost. Smoke mixed with dusk. Visibility dropped. For him, night was an ally. He moved like a shadow. Appearing, killing, disappearing again. German patrols vanished one by one. By nightfall, the numbers became horrifying. Squads wiped out. Machine gun nests destroyed. Command posts abandoned. The count kept climbing. One man, hundreds broken. Finally, German officers made the call. Withdraw. They couldn't justify the losses anymore. Not against an enemy they couldn't see or understand. The battlefield fell silent again. American infantry cautiously advanced, expecting resistance. Instead, they found devastation. Bodies everywhere. Weapons scattered. And one wounded tanker leaning against a burned Sherman. Still breathing. Officers questioned him. How many of you were here? What unit? Where's the rest? He just shook his head. There was no rest. Doctors rushed him away. As he was loaded onto a stretcher, he finally allowed himself to collapse. The adrenaline faded. The war caught up. Later, after-action reports tried to explain the impossible. They couldn't. Numbers were crossed out, rewritten, questioned again. No one wanted to believe it. One American commander said quietly, "I don't know how he did it. I only know we'd be burying a lot more men if he hadn't." He never told his story loudly. Never asked for fame. To him, it wasn't heroism. It was survival. Long after the battle, the scream stayed with him. The faces, the smoke. War didn't end when the guns stopped, because it shattered logic. Tankers fight inside tanks. Infantry fight in units. Men don't defeat armies alone. And yet, he did. History remembers generals and machines. But sometimes, it's one man, stepping out of a burning Sherman, who decides the outcome. White walls replaced fire and smoke. The smell of blood was gone, but the memories weren't. Doctors removed shrapnel from his body. Some pieces stayed forever. They said he was lucky to be alive. He didn't feel lucky. Officers visited his bed one by one. Each asked the same question differently. How did you survive? He never had an answer. You don't plan moments like that. You endure them. High command reviewed the battle. Maps spread across tables. Numbers debated in whispers. They agreed on one thing. The truth sounded impossible, so parts of it were quietly buried. He received a commendation. Not as big as it should have been. Not public. Not loud. Wars reward victories, not stories that break belief. Weeks later, he was back near the front. Not inside a tank anymore. The Sherman was gone, and something inside him was gone too. Sleep became the hardest battle. Gunfire echoed in his dreams. He woke reaching for weapons that weren't there. The war followed him everywhere. When the finally ended, crowds celebrated. Flags waved. Music played. He stood quietly among them. Some wars don't end with peace. He returned home. Got a job. Built a life. Neighbors never knew what he'd done. And he never told them. History remembers names carved in stone. not men who carried memories instead. His story lived only in reports and in the minds of those who saw the battlefield, not because of the number, not because of the kill count, but because it shows what humans are capable of when there is nothing left to lose. That Sherman tank wasn't just steel. It was fear. It was protection. It was survival. And when he stepped out of it, he stepped into legend. Decades later, German veterans spoke quietly of that day, of an American who wouldn't die, of a battle that made no sense. Even enemies remembered him. War doesn't create monsters or heroes. It reveals them. A burned Sherman sits in an empty field. Grass grows around it. Birds sing. Only history remembers what happened there. Military historians later studied the battle. They searched for logic, tactics, formations. They found none, because what happened that day wasn't doctrine. It was instinct pushed beyond human limits. Tank crews weren't trained to fight alone. They were trained to trust steel engines and crews. When that Sherman died, something else replaced it. Pure survival. And survival is the most dangerous weapon of all. The Germans made one fatal assumption, that a man without armor was harmless. In war, assumptions kill faster than bullets. German units didn't just lose men. They lost confidence. Soldiers reported being watched, hunted, surrounded, even when they weren't. Fear multiplied his power. The exact number will always be debated. War reports are messy. Bodies move. Records burn. But one fact never changed. Losses were catastrophic, far beyond what should have been possible. That's why the number survived. Publicizing the story raised questions commanders didn't want. Why was he left alone? Why did the unit collapse? Why did one man do what an entire force should have done? Silence was easier. Story 2 is full of men like him. Stories too wild, too uncomfortable. So they faded. Not because they weren't true, but because they didn't fit clean narratives. Long after the war, the injuries stayed. The limp, the nightmares, the quiet anger. Victory didn't erase trauma. It only justified it. This wasn't a last stand. He didn't expect to die. That's what makes it terrifying. He expected to live, and fought like someone who refused any other outcome. Imagine it. A battlefield full of silence. A burned Sherman. And one man standing, not celebrating, not cheering. Just breathing. History loves machines. It loves tanks, planes, numbers. But war is decided by moments. And sometimes, by a man who steps out of his tank and refuses to disappear. He didn't win medals. He didn't give interviews. But somewhere in Europe, there's a battlefield where German soldiers learned a terrifying,